In the quiet town of Basra, where the minarets kissed the sky and the call to prayer echoed through the streets like a gentle reminder of faith, lived Fatima, a curious 17-year-old girl with a mind as vast as the desert and questions as numerous as the stars. Her father, Ayad, a 55-year-old respected scholar and a devout Muslim, was known for his wisdom and his deep understanding of the Quran. Their home was filled with books, love, and the sweet smell of jasmine that danced through the air. One serene evening, as the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Fatima and Ayad sat on their old but comfortable sofa in the living room. The room was adorned with intricate Islamic calligraphy, and a soft light emanated from the traditional lanterns, creating a peaceful atmosphere. "Dad," Fatima began, his voice tentative but curious.
Is the question of seeking evidence for the existence of God a contemporary issue or not?
This inquiry, I imagine, has occupied human thought for 4,000 years or more, and to this day the matter hasn't concluded. In my belief, it will never end. It didn't just not conclude in the past, but it will also not conclude in the future.
Claiming that God exists, is it right for someone to demand from me evidence of God's existence, or is it not their right?
Everyone agrees, without exception, except those who lack reason, that it's impossible to prove or disprove a reality without evidence. No one who respects themselves, intellectually, scientifically, and philosophically, would say that we can claim something without evidence. And if you want to delve into history, look at the prophets. What was their claim? What was their original claim?
They said we are connected to the heavens.
Yes, and they are connected to revelation, connected to what is beyond your perception. They didn't demand from people to accept their claim without evidence. Then, divine signs came, through the text of the Quran or miracles, to prove that their claim was truthful. In the world of physics, in the world of chemistry, in any field of the natural and supernatural sciences, if now Einstein said something, if Darwin said something, if Newton said something, is it accepted or not? Evidence must be presented, and the truth about the need for evidence is an undisputed fact.
So what's the problem atheists have in this regard?
We find that those who deny the existence of God object to believers in God by asking them, "Why do you believe in God when you have no proof?" This is their fundamental issue. This means if you look at the writings of contemporary atheists, they say, "We have no issue. You present proof of God's existence, and we will believe." But generally, do you believe with evidence or without any evidence?
Does this mean, as a scientific principle, both the atheist and the believer in God are committed cognitively to the idea that any claim needs evidence?
Yes, those who have explored contemporary atheist research find that one of their problems is saying followers of religions believe in God and have no evidence for it. They also believe in prophecy without evidence.
So, as a principle, any claim considered acceptable and correct must be supported by evidence, because the crux of the matter is the existence of evidence.
The Quranic approach considers this fact a fundamental scientific principle necessary for every human being. Thus, the Almighty said in Surah Al-Baqarah 2:111, addressing the disbelievers, say, "Produce your proof if you are truthful." Hence, he demanded evidence and proof for their claims, considering it a necessity among scientific essentials.
We cannot use the Quran as evidence when speaking with atheists, because they will say to us, "We have yet to be convinced of the existence of God, prophecy, or the Quran for you to cite the Quran as evidence."
Here, this verse speaks about a logical truth agreed upon by every rational person, whether a believer or an atheist. Among the logical truths mentioned in the Quran is also what God Almighty says in Surah Al-Furqan 25:73, describing the true servants of God who worship Allah based on scientific and logical foundations, that they are those who, when reminded of the verses of their Lord, do not fall upon them deaf and blind. So here, the Quran considers any person who accepts any claim without evidence and proof to be both deaf and blind at the same time. Is this characteristic, to accept something blindly, praised or condemned according to Quranic teaching?
Obviously, it's a bad trait and condemned according to this Quranic statement.
Therefore, my dear, this is the rational logic that the Quranic logic orders us with. That's why you find the Quran, in many of its verses, condemns those who say, "Indeed, we found our fathers upon a community, and we will surely follow in their footsteps." The Quran condemns them because they believe without evidence. Yes, it condemns them, and this is a central point.
Why is it a central point?
Because, I must say, this is my evidence, but it's not my right to tell the other, even with your evidence, you are wrong. I cannot because he too has his evidence. It's my right to say that his evidence is invalid.
This means we should speak without assuming the intentions of others, put aside the language of treachery and deception, and focus on whether there is evidence or not for what he claims or what we claim.
Exactly. Well said.
And have atheists really provided rational proofs and evidence for all their claims of God's non-existence?
I want to focus on one of the contemporary atheists and ask him what his evidence is, because they have acknowledged this cognitive principle of the necessity to provide evidence and proof. Let's consider, for example, Richard Dawkins.
Does this logical principle of having to provide proof and evidence accept it or not?
If he accepts it, we can enter into a scientific discussion with him to ask him what the evidence is for the denial of God's existence. He asks us what the evidence is for proving God's existence, and we ask him what the evidence is for its denial.
Do you mean it's not just him asking us what the evidence is for proving God's existence? We also must ask him what the evidence is for the denial.
Yes, or at least, what do you say about the evidence we have provided? He might say he has no evidence for denial, but your evidence is invalid. We tell him that he must critique them all. So if we have presented 20 pieces of evidence, he must write a book and refute all the evidence of God's existence. And if we present 100 pieces of evidence, he must critique and refute all those 100. This is how real scientific research works. In the book, God's Undertaker, Has Science Buried God? By John C. Lennox, the author quotes Dawkins saying, "When anybody tells you something is true, always ask for the evidence. And if they cannot give you a satisfactory answer, then I hope you will think very carefully before you believe a word they say."
Is this statement respectable or not?
It is very respectable because it is based on the logical principle that requires presenting an argument and evidence for every claim.
And did Dawkins really stick to his claim? I mean, when he became an atheist, did he have evidence for the non-existence of God?
If you find that Dawkins lacks evidence for the non-existence of God, in your opinion, did he adhere to his statement or not?
Then, I would conclude he did not adhere to his words and contradicted himself.
Come with me to one of the books translated into Arabic titled Sydney Dialogues, which was translated in Baghdad in 2017. When someone asked Dawkins, in previous interviews, you mentioned you couldn't prove the non-existence of God and considered yourself more agnostic than atheist. But why do you present yourself as a hero of the atheism movement around the world? Why do you agree to appear and mislead people in television shows where you seem like a Protestant gladiator for your cause, which is atheism? Doesn't this have a lot of agnosticism and hypocrisy?
What I understand from your words is that the believer is the one who must provide evidence and proof for the existence of God, and the atheist is the one who must provide proof and evidence for the denial of God's existence.
Yes, and there's a middle ground called agnosticism.
And the agnostic is the person who has neither evidence for the existence of God nor evidence for the denial of God's existence.
Yes,
But what was Dawkins' answer?
he answered by saying, you will not find any scientist of any rational direction who can prove to you the non-existence of anything.
By this definition, Dawkins is agnostic and not an atheist in the precise sense. This is very strange,
Why?
because Dawkins presents himself as one of the leading atheists, in addition to most atheists, considering him a flag-bearer of atheism.
In the true sense, he is not an atheist, because an atheist is someone who has evidence for the non-existence of God. And the agnostic is the one who says, I have no evidence neither for proving the existence of God nor for denying it.
Does this mean that the door to scientific atheism is completely closed based on Dawkins' statement?
How so?
Because Dawkins said, you will not find any scientist from any rational direction who can prove to you the non-existence of anything. I cannot prove the non-existence of God.
Well done. Then you've understood his point because he admits that he cannot prove the non-existence of God.
This means that humans now and in the past are of two types, not three. Either believers in God or agnostics who have no evidence for the existence of God and no evidence for denying his existence. Humanity has not yet encountered a category of people who are atheists in the scientific sense of the word.
Yes, well done. And perhaps humanity will never encounter such an atheist category because, according to Dawkins, you will not find any scientist from any rational direction who can prove to you the non-existence of anything. I cannot prove the non-existence of God.
And does Dawkins' reason exclude any possibility of God's existence?
Dawkins funded advertisements on city buses that carried the message, there's probably no God. Now stop worrying and enjoy your life. If that's true about him, his use of the word probably suggests he believes there's a possibility of proving God's existence.
It's very clear. If he were certain, he wouldn't have used the word probably.
It's mentioned in the book, The Greatest Proof, by Dr. John Lennox, in refuting the fallacies of religion deniers. The author says, I believe now that adding the word probably may have been motivated by legal reasons to avoid prosecution under trade description laws because atheists realize they cannot gather enough evidence to convince a court that the probability of God's existence is zero. If the probability is not zero, then God's existence is possible.
Then how can he write that God does not exist? So, he admits the possibility of his existence, even if it's a slim chance.
Yes, it appears from his statement that he admits the possibility of God's existence. In his book, The God Delusion, he says, the probabilities of God's existence and non-existence are 7. The first probability is that God exists, 100%. The second is that God does not exist, 100%.
On what basis is this percentage, and what evidence supports it?
In the book, The Strongest Proofs by Dr. John Lennox in refuting the atheist's arguments, the author says, most followers of Dawkins in their atheism may not realize that the man does not possess a definitive denial of the existence of God. In an interview with him, Ben Stein, an interview with Dawkins, expelled, no intelligence allowed, Stein. The interviewer asked him to place a probabilistic percentage on the non-existence of God.
Professor Dawkins seemed so convinced that God doesn't exist that I wondered if he would be willing to put a number on it.
Well, it's hard to put a figure on it, but I mean, I put it as something like, 99% against or something.
Well, how do you know it's 99%?
I don't.
Say not 97%.
No, I did. You asked me to put a figure on it, and I'm not comfortable putting a figure on it. I just think it's very unlikely.
What? But you couldn't put a number on it?
No, of course not. No.
So it could be 49%.
Well, it would be. I mean, I think it's unlikely, but it's quite far from 50%.
Then, what would be the other probability? The probability of God's existence. Would it have a value or not? And based on that, should he search for God or not?
Based on all that has been presented, then Dawkins is not an atheist, but by accurate scientific description, an agnostic?
Yes, but according to his classification in his book, The God Delusion, he divides agnosticism into two types, temporary agnosticism and permanent agnosticism.
What is temporary agnosticism?
Temporary agnosticism is when someone believes that, so far, the evidence for the existence of God and the evidence for the non-existence of God are equal, and until now, the evidence for the existence has not outweighed the evidence for the non-existence or vice versa.
So does it mean the probability of proving God's existence is 50%, and the probability of denying God's existence is also 50%?
Yes, and here the temporary agnostic waits, hoping that in the future strong evidence for proving God's existence will emerge, leading them to believe in God, or evidence will come to deny God's existence, leading them to deny God.
And what is permanent agnosticism?
It is the belief that it is impossible now or in the future for any evidence to come that proves God's existence and thereby refutes the denial of God's existence. It's also impossible for evidence to emerge now or in the future that strongly denies God's existence to refute the proof of God's existence. And how does Dawkins classify himself? He says he's a temporary agnostic, meaning he's waiting for evidence. He doesn't consider the matter settled, hoping it will be decided in the future either by conclusive evidence for God's existence or by definitive evidence denying God's existence.
Does this mean deep down he admits the possibility of God's existence?
Yes. He states in his book that he would propose that God's existence is a scientific theory, like any other, although it's hard to test empirically. It falls within the scope of temporary agnosticism. He should live on the basis that he is a temporary agnostic, meaning not just him as a person, but also encouraging all his followers worldwide to search for evidence and do not stop because there might be evidence we are unaware of.
Has he actually done that?
Although he places himself at number 6 out of the 7 scales he mentioned in the God Delusion, where scale 6 is for those who intend and aim to be atheists, he thus positions himself in a scale not as an atheist, but with the intentions to become one.
So how does he live? Like an atheist or like a temporary agnostic?
According to logical reasoning, he should live as a temporary agnostic. However, he declares, I live my life as if there is no God.
Then he is not being honest with his belief, or even his adopted positions.
Yes, because he is supposed to act and live as a temporary agnostic, and therefore he has obligations consistent with an agnostic who continues to search. He calls people to atheism when he supposedly does not possess proof for the existence of God, nor proof denying God's existence.
It's strange that in all his books, lectures, and dialogues, he calls humanity to the 7th stage, which is atheism, while he himself is in the 6th stage without possessing any evidence for or against the existence of God.
In an interview on Al Jazeera with journalist Mehdi Hassan, Hassan asked him,
check something. On are you, an atheist?
For all practical purposes, yes.
You-
Nobody can actually say for certain that anything doesn't exist.
Does this mean his atheism is not for scientific reasons?
It means that scientifically, he is not an atheist because he does not have evidence to deny or prove God's existence. But from a practical behavioral standpoint, he is an atheist.
This means he is not being honest with his belief. And as a scientist who takes a stand to promote atheism, and as an important thinker in this thought, he must be honest with his belief.
In his book, The God Delusion, he says, "But my belief is that the probability is very low, and I live my life on the assumption that he does not exist."
So, in summary, one of the pillars of atheism first states that no one can provide proof for the non-existence of God.
Yes, those who have spent their lives searching for evidence for the non-existence of God have no way to prove such non-existence.
As the orange hues of the setting sun faded into the deep blue of the approaching night, the living room, filled with books and the gentle scent of evening tea, became a sanctuary of thought and contemplation for Fatima and her father, Ayad. Their conversation, a journey through the realms of belief, atheism, and the vast ocean of agnosticism, had woven a tapestry of questions and insights, illuminating the spaces between certainty and doubt. Ayad, with a serene smile, leaned forward, his eyes twinkling with wisdom and a hint of excitement for the journey of discovery he was embarking on with his daughter. "Fatima," he said, his voice steady and encouraging,
Our discussion tonight, the questions you've raised, and the curiosity that burns within you are more precious than the finest gold. They are the keys to the doors of knowledge and understanding.
Fatima, her mind alive with thoughts and her heart filled with a newfound appreciation for the depth of the conversation, nodded, her eyes reflecting the spark of eager anticipation. "My daughter," Ayad continued,
What we've embarked on is more than just a debate or a quest for answers. It's a journey of the soul, a journey that has been undertaken by thinkers and seekers since time immemorial. Tonight, we've explored the edges of our understanding, but the horizon is vast, and there are infinite wonders beyond.
He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle in the quiet room.
Tomorrow, let us continue this journey. Let us dive deeper into the questions that challenge us, armed with the courage to question and the humility to learn. For it is in seeking that we find, and in questioning, we come closer to the truth.
As Ayad spoke, the room seemed to glow with the warmth of their connection, a father and daughter united in their quest for understanding. Fatima felt a surge of anticipation, a longing for the next evening's conversation, and a deep gratitude for the bond that was strengthening between them.
"Thank you, Dad.
Fatima said, her voice filled with emotion.
I can't wait for tomorrow night. I have so many questions and I feel like we're just getting started."
Ayad reached out, placing his hand on Fatima's shoulder.
And I, my daughter, can't wait to explore them with you. Remember, the journey of faith and understanding is not a sprint, but a marathon. And on this journey, we walk together.
As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, a sense of peace and excitement for the journey ahead settled over the household. The first evening of discussion had drawn to a close, but it was clear that this was just the beginning of a profound adventure of the mind and spirit. And so, with hearts full of anticipation and minds open to the vast expanse of knowledge yet to be discovered, Fatima and Ayad looked forward to the next evening, knowing that each conversation, each question, and each moment of reflection brought them closer not just to answers, but to each other.